Time for the Roots and Roots Show with your host, Greg Rashid. Bringing you history and music from the Black American diaspora. The goal of this show is to empower you with information that you can then seed and grow within your community. Now, here's your host, Greg Rashid.
All right, this is Greg Rashid with another edition of the Root and Root Show, heard at your convenience by people all over the world. You know, for some reason, all of a sudden I got some listeners in Russia. Now, I don't know what that means, but I haven't had that in years, so I'm like, wow, man, that's amazing. But anyway, I want to say hi to my comrades in Russia right now. But this is the Root and Root Show. If you're new to the program, Greg Rashid, and we do a little bit of everything on here as far as playing music, interviews, and just having a good time. But as I said, a lot of folks listen at the convenience on everything from YouTube. You just name a device, they listen to it on. But a lot of folks listen every Sunday afternoon at 3 p.m. Mountain Time on KUHS Denver.com, created by the one and only, the legendary. To say his name brings a tear to your eye. I'm talking about Henry Archuleta. And I want to say hi all to my friends in the Colorado region. Hope to get back there at some point to visit and see folks. But we're here right now, if you're new to the program, in Bangkok, Thailand. You'll hear noises in the background because I'm on the balcony. You'll hear people selling fruit. You'll hear people selling ironwares, a little bit of everything, appliances, you name it. But we're going to have a good time as we're always doing a Root and Root Show. And we're going to start the show off today with an interview I did with Professor Jeffrey Copeland, who wrote a superb book called After Jackie, and Jackie being Jackie Robinson. 15 pioneers who helped change the face of baseball. It's on Paragon House. And we're going to get to that interview right now on the Root and Root Show. Hope you enjoy it. All right. And this is Greg Rashid again with the Root and Root Show. And I'm honored today to have as my guest an author who's written a great book. I mean, I just love this book. It's a much needed book. And the name of the book is After Jackie. And the author I'm talking about is Professor Jeffrey S. Copeland. He's of the University of Northern Iowa, a place I really love because I lived for a year. Some of you know and listen to the show. I was for a year in Iowa, and I was doing my show from Des Moines, Iowa. And I'm just glad that Jeffrey wrote this book because it really gets into the Black players who started after Jackie, who basically integrated the other teams. The other teams, you know, because a lot of folks are focusing right now on Jackie Robinson, the 75th anniversary of him integrating Major League Baseball in 1947. But there were other players that you forget. You know, Larry Doby with Cleveland, he came on after Jackie, but there are so many players that are not talked about. And this book really gets into that. I'm just happy that Jeffrey wrote it. And so are you there, Jeffrey?
Yes, thanks for having me on the air. I really appreciate this.
I really appreciate that you wrote this book, and the book is on Paragon House Press. And it is just a great book. It's 15 pioneers to help change the face of baseball, and they definitely did. And what Jeffrey inspired you to even write the book?
Actually, it was Carlos Paula, one of the 15.
Yeah,
And
one of
just
my
very
favorites.
quick, one of my favorites too. And actually, how this came about, I was in a Mexican restaurant one night with my wife, and there was a baseball game on the television on one of the walls. And on the baseball game, one of the players made two errors in one inning. And after the second error, the announcer, who was a national announcer, said, "Who does this guy think he is? The second coming of Carlos Paula?" And I just started howling. And my wife looked at me like I was crazy. And she said, "Well, what's so funny?" So I told her a little bit about Carlos Paula. And the story I told her is absolutely true. Carlos Paula was one of the best hitters of the 1950s. He was so good, players like Mickey Mantle, Ted Williams, Stan Musial actually admired his swing. So he classic hitter. But the thing was, he never could get the hang of catching the darn baseball. So one day they put him at first base because he was a disaster in the outfield. a hot dog wrapper blew out into the field right by Carlos. He reached down and shagged it with his glove, and the fans gave him a standing ovation. It was the only thing he caught all day. So,
My
okay,
goodness.
so anyway, with that story, my wife started laughing. And then the next day I thought, you know what? I know that Carlos was one of the pioneers who came after Jackie with the Washington Senators, but I started thinking, I wonder about the others because Jackie was on one of 16 major league teams at the time. What about the other 15 pioneers who broke the color barrier for the other franchises?
Right.
I did a quick search. I found out a doctoral dissertation had been done about the other 15. Pretty nice, but very dry. A children's book had been done about the other 15. Very nice, but very limited in audience.
I
But
didn't
there
know that.
really wasn't,
I didn't know there was a
yeah,
children's book out there. I didn't know that.
yeah, but there wasn't anything that was very comprehensive about the 15. There were others that talked about other athletes who came after Jackie in general, football, basketball, baseball, whatever.
Right.
But in terms of the 15, nothing really had been done. So I contacted several groups, the National Baseball Hall of Fame, and they said, please do this book. We've been waiting for somebody to do it. I talked to the Negro Baseball Hall of Fame in Kansas City, and they said, great idea, do it. We'll help you every
Wow.
way we can. I
Yeah,
talked to,
my good friend Bob Kendrick. Yeah, he runs that.
yes, yes.
Great guy.
And as a matter of fact, they just opened an exhibit called After Jackie that
Right.
runs sort of parallel to what I did in my book. And then I contacted my publisher, and my publisher said, you mean nobody's done this before? And I said, well, no. And they said, well, good grief, do it. So everybody rolled out the red carpet. I contacted Major League Baseball, and they said, please do it. The individual franchises that were still left of those original 16 welcomed me with open arms, rolled
Wow.
out the red carpet. So, I mean, this was a dream come true for me because not only was I interested in it, but everybody else said, it's time this book is done.
That's
So I
really,
just
you know,
felt
Jeffrey, that's
honored.
really surprising because usually Major League Baseball, and I dealt with them for many years by covering the Rockies for various stations in the Colorado region from 2000 2013. They can be a little like hesitant when someone comes along and wants to write something about players or a team's history. They can get, they can get hesitant, but I guess things have changed now that they want folks to write this stuff they're open arms about it. Bring it, if you want to write about a
Well,
team or history, they do it. You can do it.
well, it's like Branch Rickey said, he was the GM who signed Jackie. His most famous quote is, luck is the residue of design. And in
Yeah.
my particular case, I think Major League Baseball and the others really supported me because they knew by the time my book was published, it would be the 75th anniversary of Jackie taking the field. So
Uh,
they were already planning all these celebrations for Jackie. And then when I came along, I guess they thought I would be an ally. And I've done my best to try to promote all of the other activities that go with Jackie Robinson's anniversary as well.
that's great. That is something there. But let's continue with for Carlos because growing up in Washington D.C. and I was too young. I was a baby when he was playing, but I just remember the name when I got older and started collecting baseball cards and going to see the second edition of the Washington Senators. That name would come up every now and then, and you would always hear the stories about how bad a fielder he was. You always hear that. But talk a little more about him and what he went through as playing for the Senators and just playing baseball in general.
Okay, the thing about Carlos, I'll tell you a couple of different stories here that'll really give you sort of an overview of what he went through. The first thing is, yes, he was a tremendous hitter. He wasn't as bad a fielder as people made him out to be. Yes, he had issues in the field, but I mean, he wasn't that bad. The problem with Carlos was he loved life. He absolutely had life by the tail. Baseball was so dramatically different in the States from what it was where he came from in Cuba. So he wasn't used to the pace of the game. And he was very happy-go-lucky, a wonderful man. By all accounts, he would give you the shirt off his back. But he wanted some personal time to himself, which he could do in Cuba. But when he got here to baseball in the United States, it wasn't as easy. I'll
Right.
give you an example. He needed some time off. So what he did is he told his manager one time, I need to go out and buy a suit. And his manager said, sure, Carlos, go ahead. He showed up 7 days later. And the manager said to him, now, wait a minute, Carlos, you just went out to buy a suit. Where did you go? He said, Havana.
Well, it makes
So
sense.
he did. It makes sense. It makes sense. So, I mean, he came back and he didn't really feel that he had done anything horribly wrong. He needed some time off, which, made sense to him. Okay, the other thing, one season, his grandmother died 3 different times. And he kept using it with different members of the baseball organization. And finally, they said to him, "Now, wait a minute. Nobody dies 3 times. What is your grandma, Lazarus?" So,
Well, that's like the old excuse in elementary school, like, my mother's sick. My mother died, or somebody died. The same person keeps dying every time you don't want to go to school, and tell the principal that that excuse.
exactly, exactly. So Carlos did a few of those antics. He didn't mean any harm by any of it. But the other major problem with Carlos is his English wasn't that great. Spanish was his first language. So when sports writers would ask him questions, he often couldn't answer them. The team did not try to get a translator to help him out. So this was really horrible. The sports writers in Washington started putting him in caricature in the papers. And actually, it was horrible. They
Oh
played
yeah.
upon racial stereotypes when they put him in the paper. And they did cartoons with Carlos where they would make him speak this strange form of English. Like, I'll never forget one of them. I saw this at the Baseball Hall of Fame. They had a copy of it there. When Carlos got his big contract, they had him saying, "Me now buy big pink Cadillac,"
Yeah.
and just like a child would say, or something like that. So the more the sports writers, let's be honest, it was just overt racism, is what it was.
And
The
and
more they,
sometimes that creeps in, even in some broadcasts now of Major League Baseball. There are still some insensitive sports reporters and all who will do that when a Latino player
oh,
will come
for
to bat.
everything,
Oh
for
yeah.
everything. Right now, everything is fair game. Race, color, creed, national origin, lifestyle, you name it. And you're going to find announcers who, one way or another, either overtly or just under the table, they make comments that hurt.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's still out there. That's still there. I mean, for all the good that Jackie did and the other 15, there's still so much to go. So much.
Oh, it definitely is. And the other thing too, and we had talked off air about this, but I have Jeffrey's his book, by the way, is After Jackie, 15 Pioneers Who Helped Change the Face of Baseball on Paragon House. And we were talking about the fact that I have 11 of those 15 players as far as baseball cards. They're here with me in Bangkok, Thailand. And on some of these cards, speaking of the racism, when they're talking about the players, when you look on the back, after you look at their faces on the front, they will always have a cartoon of a white player talking about that player as far as that's supposed to be the player. I'm looking right now at the Ozzie Virgil one, and on the back of it, it's a picture of a white person that's talking about Ozzie. And it's just so,
Oh,
it's like,
absolutely.
it's rare when you see a depiction of someone actually black on the back of a card. There's one I got here of Elston Howard, and on the back, he's depicted basically as a monkey. He's sliding into home plate, he's depicted as a monkey. And that's
Oh,
terrible.
absolutely. Absolutely. It was still a reflection of the racism of the time. And for the writings on the back of the baseball cards, again, for a lot of the players of color, they were just gross caricatures.
Awful.
And I mean, that's what kids saw in that era.
Yeah. Growing up and, beginning to collect cards in the early 60s and all that. It's like, I would say that's not him. That's not me. That's not what I want to see on the back of these cards. Even I, Even as a little kid, I just knew that wasn't right.